Good afternoon and welcome to our session, Encouraging and Engaging Students on the Discussion Board. Our presenter today is Dr. Laurie Slifka, the faculty member at Kaiser University. If you have any questions for the presenter during our session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of your Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenter.
All right, how to find that mute button. Thank you so much for the nice introduction. My name is Dr. Laurie Slifka, and I'm a graduate school psychology professor at Kaiser University. I teach primarily online, and so in my job, I do a lot of asynchronous discussion boards. And I came from a traditional role teaching in the classroom, and then switched over to this job actually pre-COVID. So I was kind of getting used to it before we entered that era. So I've spent the last 5 years working on refining my practice as we do require students to use the discussion board. So today I wanted to share with you some things that I've learned along the way and some things I've learned from the literature. So hopefully they can help, these tools can help you in online and hybrid courses. And so we're going to talk about the benefits of discussion board engagement, best practices, and discuss strategies for overcoming any challenges. So at the end, hopefully you walk away and you have tools to create supportive and engaging discussion boards in your course room. Alrighty, so here's our outline for today. We're going to start off by talking about the benefits of discussion board engagement. So I think, you know, a lot of people have different feelings about using the discussion board and not using the discussion board. So, you know, it's not all perfect, but we're going to talk about some positives in terms of learning. How does it help facilitate learning? I'm going to share some best practices with you that, like I said, I've learned along the way and things that I've researched in the literature. And this was not part of the original plan when I proposed this topic, but things have really shifted since the end of December till now in terms of AI. So I did want to talk a little bit about challenges in the online discussion board in general, and now new challenges that we face with generative AI. So, you know, as educators, we know that ChatGPT and other AI software is out there. That can be a huge challenge for us as educators to ensure that students are still learning and utilizing critical thinking, particularly in an asynchronous environment. So I wanted to just put that out there and talk about that a little bit and how we can overcome, you know, start to overcome some of those challenges, and then challenges in general when it comes to the online discussion board. So we're going to start off by talking about the benefits of discussion board engagement. So some of you, if you're teaching an online class, may be like, oh, discussion board and I have to respond and whatnot. And I don't want you to think of it like that. I know in our university, we do have that requirement. So I've tried to, you know, spice it up in a way that it's not that. It's something that is beneficial for both me and for the students. So we know at the core, the discussion board should be used for demonstration of knowledge of key concepts. If we're using it that way in terms of lessons and not just this place where they can, you know, discuss aspects of the class or their day, but if we're using it for a learning tool, then we want to ensure that they're demonstrating the knowledge of key concepts in the course that they're expected to. We want our discussion boards to support our course objectives. So we always want to go back and just making sure that we're not too off track with that and we're actually using it in a beneficial way that can actually, you know, that can encourage students to be active on it and utilizing it and not just doing it because they have to. And then I think a really important component of the discussion board, particularly in an asynchronous environment, you know, fully online classes, is that community building. So I teach in a graduate program with master's and doc students, and they see each other 2 times within their program, and that's for a week. And so, you know, especially within a graduate program, it's so important to have that community. So they can use the discussion board for these important things like learning, understanding course objectives, but also through in terms of they can build their community. And I see a lot of students like, hey, I remember you from my last class, because they get used to speaking to each other and responding to each other's posts on the board. So that community building piece, I think, is really important. That's what I'm going to focus a lot on. So we're going to talk about, the components of that, including reflection, consensus building, critical thinking, and then we want to make it engaging and enjoyable. So we don't, even if we're teaching something that some students don't like I teach statistics in a psychology program and they don't love it, but I try to make the discussions as enjoyable and engaging as I can while they're still learning something. So I want to go over some best practices that I found that are helpful for me when I'm teaching a fully online class. So, you want to start off the class on a good note. And I think often we can use the discussion board just for simple introductions like, hi, how are you? What's your name? I see there's questions going on in the chat. For the moderators, let me know if you want me to answer questions along the way or wait till the end. I'm happy to do either one.
We're going to have a designated Q&A.
Okay.
So
okay.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So I will answer your question at the end. So in terms of starting the class off, on a good note from day one, instead of, hey, how are you? What's your degree? Where do you live? I try to do something that's a little bit more engaging to help with that community building. So I provide students with an opportunity to get to know each other and interact more in an informal way, especially when they're all online. I think this is important because they can at least get to know maybe one other classmate. So it could make them feel more comfortable, especially if maybe it's their first course in the graduate program. So here are some options for community building in terms of what they can do at the beginning of the term. So one thing I do is, there's personal introductions. That's our most common, like introduce yourself on the discussion board, say where you're from, talk about your pets. But some other things, partner interviews. So each student come up with questions, like 20 questions to ask their partner that they're paired with. They can ask them synchronously, through we use Microsoft Teams, a chat or the phone, or asynchronously send some emails. And then once the answers have been shared, each member is assigned to create a bio for their partner, and they introduce them to the class on the discussion board. So they've already made that connection there, and they may feel a little bit more comfortable. Virtual beach ball. So we use a random number generator. So we have a list of questions and then use a random number generator. And students will use that random number generator and see what number they get that corresponds to a specific question. So question could be, what 3 adjectives best describe you? And they would then answer that on the discussion board. It could be, if you were in a desert island, or if you were stranded on a deserted island, what books would you bring with you? What are you most proud of? And so they're kind of doing something a little bit different than where am I from? I'm from Florida. Who's done that? You can use a class wiki. The instructor creates a list of items relating to home, school, and work life and posts the list on a wiki for students to access. So typically you would do something like this face to face, like, who's dyed their hair purple. But you can do it in a virtual environment in which people type their names next to the item on the list. So it could be like, who served in the armed forces, who has become a parent, who's traveled abroad, who's gone snow skiing, etc. And then, that would be up for everybody to see and be like, oh, I have something in common with Susan. And then there's virtual name tags, which I think it's tough for us using Blackboard, but essentially they can be a little bit more creative, more artsy, and create more of an artistic virtual name tag that has information about themselves. Like in the center, they have their first and last name. In one corner, they list things they like to do. In another corner, they list their favorite artists. Then another corner, their favorite movies. So it's just something a little bit different, more creative, and they put a little bit more effort into it. So that's a good way to, we call it terms, but it could be starting off the semester. So when we get into actual prompts, when thinking about discussion posts we do them each week. to go along with whatever lesson it is of the week. So I want you to keep Bloom's taxonomy in mind. I'm a neuroscientist by training, so I always suggest engaging the frontal lobe. So those higher order tasks. So by like generating, planning, producing, going the extra mile and engaging, like I said, that frontal lobe instead of just like factual information. So, you know, it's often, I think, I'm going to show you some examples, but it's good to implement lower order thinking and higher order thinking skills when it comes to the discussion. You can take a multifaceted approach to your questions. So I always keep this on my desk. When I first started in the graduate program, my chair at the time gave me this and was like, this will really help you. And it's so silly. This is a teaching tool we use all the time, but this is just something that I've always come back to and I always use when I'm creating my assignments and when I'm creating my discussion posts. So using this, I just want to start by providing you with a couple examples that we have within our program in our first course for graduate students, in which we're attempting to meet the goals of discussion. So demonstration of knowledge of key concepts, supporting course objectives, and community building while using Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so here's our first course in the psychology doctoral program. Here are our course objectives. So develop perspectives as a scholar through reading, writing, and reflection, evaluate information from scholarly sources, analyze and synthesize scholarly literature while developing research skills, and then apply advanced academic writing skills. So I try to hit on all of these. And then keeping those goals in mind when I'm creating a discussion prompt and Bloom's taxonomy. So let's go over some examples. So here's one example. I love TED Talks. And when we go into the artificial intelligence conversation, this is going to be something that you're going to want to keep in mind because artificial intelligence isn't great summarizing information from something like a video. So this could be challenging for something like a chatbot. So just keep this in your mind. But this is a multifaceted prompt. They're engaging a lot of different aspects of Bloom's taxonomy. So lower to higher order thinking. They are working on writing as a scholar, evaluating information, analyzing and synthesizing. And they're doing all of these things. And they're doing something that's engaging and enjoyable because we know TED Talks can be really, really cool, especially if these are students at the beginning of the program. You get them really excited about psychology because there's such cool experiments out there. So we ask them to watch TED Talks and then describe what they found as the most intellectually intriguing and perhaps surprising. Okay, so that's a starter question, like, oh, what do you find interesting about this? We're starting more with that lower level thinking, okay? And that's also something that a chatbot would not be great at, right? And then we take that information and we apply it, and it's more analytical and it involves more critical thought. So they take an aspect of the videos and create a research question related to one of the topics that the TED speaker addressed. Explain the independent and dependent variables. This is again hitting on our research question or our course objectives. And then explain what extraneous variables could impact the study. So we're taking something, we're having them learn about psychology. It's not too intense that we're making them read a bunch of scholarly articles, which they have to do in other aspects of the class. And we're having them implement skills we want them to come out of the class in. And then they're going to respond to a certain amount of students and contribute to their research design, critically analyzing and offering their advice. So building on each other's research design. And this is a great way to start off intro students into thinking about research, thinking about psychology. So here's another one that brings in the scholarly literature because that's one of our course objectives as well. This also involves a video, so it's a little bit more engaging and enjoyable, and it's tapping into more higher level thinking. They're supposed to summarize, which is more lower order, and then synthesize the information, which is more higher order. So they're to read an article, a scholarly article, and watch a presentation to understand critically thinking as a scholar and ethical challenges. So they read it, they watch it, and summarize and synthesize the information. Okay, so this is a little bit simpler than the first one that we had was multifaceted, but these are the types of prompts that we have in our class each week. And We're always trying to hit on those course objectives, and we're always trying to hit, at least I am in my classes, those goals that I have. Okay. So these are how you write like or you could, you do not have to do it like me at all. But these are ways that you can do like traditional discussion prompts. But if you're feeling really motivated, you can do some more like traditional in-person approaches to learning on the discussion board in an asynchronous environment. There are ways to tailor these cool things that we can do in class and put them on the discussion board to make it less monotonous. Oh, I'm reading an article, I'm answering questions about it, I'm writing to 3 different students about it. So remember our goals of our discussion. We want to demonstrate the knowledge of our key concepts, support our course objectives, and we want to work on community building. This is great for community building. So for any of you that attended Dr. Daniel's talk yesterday on critical thinking, she's one of my colleagues. We work together a lot. We're part of the teaching and learning community at Kaiser. And so we've actually presented on and done a lot of role play in asynchronous environment at our school. She did talk about that a little bit yesterday. And then debates, which can be really cool on the discussion board. We can use polling both on and off the discussion board. I'll explain what I mean by that. And also peer review, which is just like, it's tapping in other skills, and it's an activity that we can do in the discussion board, kind of changing it up from like the more monotonous. So role play. So role play is a form of experimental learning where students take on a different persona and work together through a given scenario, interacting in their assumed roles. They could be working together and they could all be one role, or they could all have individual roles within whatever our scenario is. And it encourages students to look at something from a different viewpoint. We can do this a lot in psychology with like famous psychological experiments. So like Milgram's experiment. We can have them all be different characters and take on the perspective of the experimenter versus the participant. Something I do in my neuroscience class, which is, kind of a little bit different, but it's taking on a different aspect of the neuron. So like, I am the dendrite. This is what I do. I am the axon. This is what I do. So they're still describing it, but it's taking it on, kind of looking at it from a different perspective that I think makes it a little bit more exciting. So we've done this. It's pretty cool for an online learning environment. It gives them more freedom to express themselves, be a little bit silly, and learn in a different way. Provide students opportunities to creatively interact with their peers, which creates that sense of community. And then leadership skills. It can help develop leadership skills, which is really important for employers. So I'm going to talk to you about, just to throw in some extra fun stuff, I'm going to talk about how you can do it in an asynchronous and a synchronous environment, because you might want to do it even if it's an online class on like a Zoom meeting, or what we call Kaiser Live, which is our live classes. So I'm going to talk to you about that, just to throw it in for fun. So for asynchronous, you would give roles. For example, it could be like a participant and a researcher. It could be, like I said, a different type of neuron. Students are given a certain amount of time to post in an asynchronous discussion concerning their specific roles. And then they're required to post a certain amount of responses. And then they can direct questions at certain roles as appropriate. But they would use the whole discussion board speaking from their own perspective, whatever they've been given. In a synchronous environment, you can give roles ahead of time and, or have the student research the roles, or it could be more like an impromptu in a meeting, and you like give them like 5 minutes to look over stuff and then play that character. And then a set time is given to students to act out that role, and then the instructor will coordinate that role play activity. Peer review, which is just a lot of different ways that you can do peer review. You can do it on the discussion board itself, or you can have students basically analyze somebody's discussion post response and just send it directly to them. It's however you want to do it. But peer review is great, and it can be something that you incorporate within the discussion board so students can work on improving their discussion responses. So it allows students to learn from each other and see each other's work, and They can learn how to read more carefully, strengthen their own writing by reviewing other people's. And sharing their work obviously can help students learn to write for broader audiences. So one way to avoid the pitfalls of peer review, I find that my students are generally very nice to each other, and considerate. Sometimes you get students that it's very rare that can be a little bit more inappropriate, but I give them the prompts I heard, I noticed, I wondered. So they approach it in that way. So it can be helpful without being critical. Wait 1 second. All right, debates are another way to stimulate critical thinking and can be a highly effective way to engage students in research in an online classroom. So discussion boards provide an opportunity for online instructors to use a strategy such as debate. So you can do a structured debate held asynchronously. So you can essentially do it using many techniques that you would use in a traditional face-to-face classroom. So class is divided into 2 or more groups of participants. Debate is conducted using whatever rules that you choose. And using the online discussion forum, each group could have a private forum to construct their arguments on the topic. So they can all work together as a group, consensus building, and make their arguments for the topic, and then bring it back maybe to the whole discussion board. And then go back and have kind of like a back and forth structured debate on the discussion board. It could be formal or simple, depending on the needs of the assignment. So decide on the motivation or concept being debated. So it could be like, if it's psychology, it could be something with ethics, for example. If something should be allowed, if we should be allowed to do drug testing in animals, just an example of one. So decide on the topic that's being debated, divide the class into teams, and decide who's going to argue for it and who's going to argue against it. And then they, go in their separate discussion forums, which can be done asynchronously. They come up with their argument, they take turns, and then they go back, take turns adding statements that support or refute the argument. And then the instructor could debrief at the end of the debate, exploring which arguments I found, least and most compelling. And then as a group, they can reflect on if their stance of the actual argument or the debate changed in response. Polling is something else you can do. We're a research-based program, and so we work with them to conduct their own surveys, to conduct their own polls. So this is a little bit more open-ended. I don't have like a specific thing you can do with this, but you could have them create SurveyMonkey, polls, questionnaires, and then have them put it on the discussion board. And then they could collect data from the rest of the class, enter it in SPSS, run statistics. It's a statistics class. Or, they could, if it's like our thesis class and they've created their own polls, their own surveys, they could share their results of that on the discussion board. And, they could work on sharing descriptive statistics, for example, like graphs and charts and whatnot. And so that could actually be like multifaceted over multiple weeks, where they're, actually going out conducting research either within the class or not within the class, and then sharing information. Okay. So, like I said, this became like a little bit more impromptu. When I submitted in December, and then things really changed. So the discussion board has some challenges, as we know, and now we're really a lot more challenged. It kind of depends on the way that you look at it, but we definitely do have more challenges in the area of AI and ChatGPT. And so I'm sure this is familiar to you, but I just want to just provide a prompt from ChatGPT. Just to have it. So I am working on redesigning a stats class. And I pulled things from an old stats class we had, and this was a discussion. When might someone prefer mode over mean or median to describe the data's set central tendency, when is median preferred over the mean to describe a variable. So this isn't really hitting on anything we talked about. It's more just factual based question, and that they're really not developing critical thinking skills, building community, any of that fun stuff. It's more factual. So this is an old prompt, but so I'm working on redesigning the class, and to get around some of the ChatGPT stuff, I'm asking them to dive into recent scholarly literature, to reflect, to synthesize, to summarize things that AI are not good at. But just want to show you an example. So this, if not, hopefully serves as more motivation to beef up those discussion boards, to use more creative activities, to do debate and role play, and integrate the things we talked about, because this is a ChatGPT answer to this. So, there's issues with learning, and I don't want to get into any sort of debate on that and whatnot, because it's still very new, and I know every university has their own policy. But when you're doing more of a fact-based discussion, you can get an answer like this, which is a very, I went over it, it's a very good answer. It doesn't have sources cited and whatnot, but a student can absolutely take this, make it their own, and do well if this was my discussion board. So I just wanted to show this as an example, and hopefully a motivation to make those discussion boards a little bit, different, more engaging. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI. We're going to talk a little bit about challenges. So in the era of AI, particularly like chatbots that can generate text like ChatGPT, this has been an issue that's been ongoing for a while. We just have things that are better now. So since we're here, it can make making discussion prompts difficult. So we, kind of have to dive in. We have to get creative and make assignments that can be like essentially too challenging for a bot to complete. So we can ensure that students are doing work and they're learning. Because if we're not doing these things, we have some issues. We have reduced authenticity. So while chatbots can mimic the human response and generate texts that seem authentic, we may have difficulty determining if they are or they aren't the student's response. And then we're not really sure if the student is learning. So this is not a policy discussion. This is not anything. This is just pure learning, critical thinking. If we can do our job as a professor to limit students' ability to even use this, because it's not going to help them, then I think that that's a good thing. So there may be limited engagement. It may discourage the students from participating because they're like, it's a fact-based question, whatever, I can just type it in, like that mean, median, and mode thing, and not really that into it, as opposed to something that may be kind of fun, like taking on a role or partnering in a debate with classmates. And then obviously plagiarism is an issue. That's a talk for a different day, but can generate responses and be plagiarized, and then that puts us in a unique situation as a professor. So prompts that ask students to engage in something a little bit different, like reviewing a video and reflecting on the video, or reviewing an article from 2022, because the chatbots right now, as of today, are not going past 2021. If you want them to talk about personal experience, all of those things are going to be a little bit more difficult for a chatbot. So we can really get the students' original work, and we can hopefully get them to learn, because that's our goal here. So just some limitations of AI. I know I'm kind of going off track, but I'm gonna wrap it back in a bit. I'm really passionate about this right now, because we just have to figure out how to do the best we can for our students. So these chatbots are not perfect. So if we understand what the limitations are, then we can make our discussions more meaningful and better. So chatbots don't understand the context, so they're not capable of understanding complex nuances of language. They have a limited knowledge base, so they've been trained on a large amount of text, but they don't have access to the internet, so they don't have knowledge of all of the scholarly research that's out there. They lack understanding of grammar and syntax, the inability to interpret and synthesize information, which I showed you an example of. There are some out there that are okay at that, but these text generation ones are not great at, reading something, watching a video, and then synthesizing the information, and they're not creative, which we get from our students, and we want to continue to see that. So prompts that include personal opinion, students write about articles and videos can be really challenging for AI. So again, students describing what they found is intellectually intriguing about a video. Remember, perhaps surprising, creating a research question, explaining the dependent variables, the extraneous variables, critically analyze each other's response and build on. That is not something a chatbot's going to be able to do well. So I hope that that advice is helpful to you if this is something that you're struggling with right now. So this is where I this is where I would be if it was pre-November 2022. We wouldn't have taken that little detour to talk about it, but we did. So let's just go back to like general challenges that we've seen for a while, even before this, in terms of challenges of the discussion board. So lack of participation, especially if, in our program, we have clear guidelines. But it's like you have to, unless it's some like unique discussion board experience, generally we ask that they provide an initial response and 3 follow-up responses. Even if they're participating, it can be a lack of participation because it can be very half done. Negative interaction. So I don't see it much with graduate students, but sometimes they can be critical of one another. Or, sometimes, especially in an asynchronous environment, when we text, things can be misconstrued and interpreted in the wrong way. And sometimes, we would have to step in. I don't see that very much, but it is definitely an issue in any sort of text-based communication. Well, in any sort of communication in general, as we know. Things that are off topic, I see this all the time. Just the people start going into like personal stuff and then like going into tangents, then it gets the whole thing off track. And then limited engagement, which goes with lack of participation. So it's not a perfect science. I think we can make our discussion prompts and our discussion activities fun and engaging, and hopefully that deters some of these issues and gets around some of these challenges, but obviously it's not perfect. Some other things that we can do are set clear guidelines. So what do we expect of our students from the beginning? We should set guidelines in terms of what behavior we expect. We expect them to be respectful, on topic, productive. We can outline what's acceptable and what's not, and we can give examples of tone that is acceptable. We want to create a sense of community that can help hopefully remedy some of the negative interactions, encourage students to introduce themselves in maybe a fun way, provide opportunities for students to share their experiences and perspectives. We want to use inclusive language to create this positive and supportive environment. We want to provide opportunities for reflection. So we can encourage this by open-ended questions, providing opportunities to reflect on their own learning, reflect on their classmates' learning. We want to model reflective behavior for them, encourage collaboration. I've given some examples of how we can do that, multiple different ways of how they can collaborate, even within an asynchronous environment. And then we want to make sure we're monitoring and moderating. I make sure to check my discussion board every day. That's on the docket for after this, just to make sure that everything's going well, because discussion board is such a big part of my classes. So we want to ensure that people are productive, inclusive, and respectful. If there's something that is very disrespectful, I remove it and I contact the student always and talk to them about why that may be. Most of the time it's unintentional. I don't think students are intending to be disrespectful to one another. But if there's a negative interaction, I will intervene on that. So you have to make sure to be present to get ahead of that. And we also want to try to like rope the discussion back if it's getting off track. So overall, by implementing these strategies, it's not perfect, but it can help overcome some of the challenges. So just to go back to this, just to summarize everything essentially. So let's go back to a well-designed discussion board. So a well-designed discussion board can be used in the following ways. So demonstration and knowledge of key concepts, supporting course objectives, and community building in terms of reflection, consensus building, and critical thinking. And at the end of the day, we really just want to think about it as a learning tool that's engaging and enjoyable. Because imagine your professors discussion posts like, what is the mean and how is the mean different from the median? You're probably not going to be that excited about it. So think about what you would want to do, and then, it can help your students as well. So, none of this is perfect. Synchronous online environment, we want to make students feel like they're part of a community. We want to make students feel like they're important and their ideas are being heard. So yeah, I encourage you to utilize some of these techniques. If you find them to be helpful, feel free to take whatever you want from this. And I do hope this helps you in your classroom. It was really lovely speaking to all of you. We are now moving on to the Q&A, and I think the first time in Hawks history for me, I have not gone over time. So that is a Friday miracle for me. So happy to take any questions. I see there's some in the chat. I can try to do the best that I can. Okay. All right, so Brooklyn, we use Blackboard. So wondering what LMS you use, whether you run into grading issues. Okay, so it depends what you do. I've run into this, Brooklyn, and then so where I worked before, I've been in the same environment for 5 years. So I think I see things different. I think I'm slightly skewed in the way that we do things, but I think a lot of people do independent discussion. So like everybody in the class has their own initial discussion, and then people go in within that forum and respond. We do one big discussion board. So I have a prompt, and then everybody's just on that board, like it's one community classroom as opposed to individual prompts. I don't think a lot of people do that, but that makes grading a lot easier because everything is there. So when I go into my grade book, I see, Susie Q. I click on her to grade, and there's her initial and all three of them, so I can see them all on one screen. And that's if I use that entire, I just use one board. I'm happy to help you out with this. I don't know if that makes sense, but I am giving you my email right now. If I could always jump on a Teams call with you and show you what I do, or we can like chat via email or anything. I'm happy to help you with that. So I think I typed in my answer. If you have any follow-up questions on that, feel free to let me know. I guess, moderators intervene if you need, but I'll just keep going through this. Okay. Do you have thoughts to share for the following? Unless points are assigned, most of the time students don't want to interact in the discussion forum. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I think we run into that more with undergrad students. My graduate students are a little bit more engaged because it is a place for them to talk to their other classmates, which they don't really get. So we do, I occasionally have ones that are optional, so they can like talk to each other about their assignments and whatnot. And they usually do contribute to those because it's helpful for them. But most of the time we do assign points on the things that essentially matter more. So yeah, I think we see that in general for a lot of things in education, unfortunately. And then number 2, in the discussion, if a student sees incorrect message posted by another student, they don't mention about it and don't give correct information in the response to help the other student. I think they do and don't. I think it's our job as a professor to that's part of that, like moderating it. So I think, we can moderate and we can model. So we want to be respectful to other students. I'll often step in and be like, this is a really interesting way of thinking about it. Like, thank you for sharing that response with me. The way that, name the author, whatever the article is, discusses it is like this, this, and this. And so correct, and then model that for the rest of the students as well. I think some students may not read thoroughly, or they may not feel comfortable or know how to approach the student in that way. So I think we really need to be active on our boards, make sure that we're moderating, seeing things that may be incorrect, correcting it in a respectful way. let me know if that answers your question or you have anything else. So Brooklyn, the way that we generally do it is that all of them are graded. So in most of our classes, and this, I'm just going to speak generally about how we do it, is we have one that's required and 2 to 3 responses that are required, and they're rubric graded. So in response to like a traditional prompt, like I showed at the beginning, we would grade the quality of the initial response and the follow-up responses, and we'd grade the quantity and the timing. So we expect them to have quality responses. Their first response is expected to be submitted by Wednesday of each week, and their follow-up responses are by Sunday. We encourage them to participate at least 3 days a week so that they're staying, this is they take one class at a time. So this is like, they're really supposed to be in that classroom. So all of those things are included in the rubric: quality, quantity. And so if they're not engaging with their peers, then they're dinged for that. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions. You have my email as well. Okay. AI sessions I've attended recently, the presenters have suggested we raise the stakes on our assignment discussion prompts to subvert. I agree. Yeah. Wasn't technology supposed to reduce inequity? Yeah, I mean, I think raising the stakes is one thing, but I think you can take it from another approach too and just be a little bit more creative with what you're asking of them. You don't necessarily have to make it more difficult to create that, larger gap, which I think you're exactly right. That we already do have this large gap, and technology necessarily isn't going to be helping that. So making things harder, I don't think is necessarily the right approach here. I think that we tailor it, we figure out where we are that day, because AI is constantly advancing, and we work to still challenge our students so that the tool can't complete it fully. So asking them to reflect on personal experience in relation to something they learned too, is not necessarily making it more challenging, but it still does get around ChatGPT being able to do it. Ultimately, we can't get around it overall, but I think it's our job as educators to tailor and to try to work with the technology rather than just make it harder. I don't know, it's just my thought on it. Okay. Oh, there are more questions. Maybe I should have had you guys do this as moderators, because I apparently am not following this really well. Okay. How do I assign points? I think I might have answered that. I'm happy to share this. So Melanie, I can share with you if you email me how I do it, but we have rubrics. And so, like I said, it's based on quality and quantity, and we have set guidelines for what we expect for every discussion points. I think asking them to reflect on personal experiences can meet it if you're doing it in addition to something else. So I don't think it's a perfect solution. It's just one way of still getting them involved in thinking about things in relation to something else. In no way do I think that it's meeting the course competencies. It's just in addition. Yeah, so asynchronous online class, it depends how you do the weekly discussion. So if you incorporate it, you make it into something like a debate or role play or something, they may not view it as work so much. And if you want to keep it interactive, you can do voice discussion. So you can do like audio discussion where they're actually like recording it and then posting their response. ChatGPT can still be a problem when it comes to that, but you can do something like that. Or you can also implement any of these suggestions that I provided, like role play, debate, in a synchronous setting. So you could do like something like a Zoom session or whatnot in order to keep it interactive. So yeah, I think the discussion board can get monotonous. that's, that was part of the approach here, is to try to think of some things that make it maybe a little bit more exciting, a little bit, it might motivate the students a little bit more than to do this, which I think we do sometimes. And I think I'm guilty too, but I do try to throw in that other stuff to make it less so like, to do this. We scaffold and move students higher. I don't think the old prompt was good enough anyway, though. So I think especially at a higher level in higher education, moving up on Bloom's taxonomy is important no matter what. You don't have to purposefully increase the difficulty just for this. I think to get students to critically think in general, even without ChatGPT, we should be moving away from those factual understanding level questions on the discussion board anyway. We can use a quiz for that. But if we want them to engage and we want them to, utilize those critical thinking skills, I think regardless of AI and ChatGPT, then we should be moving away from that, at least for something that we want to be interactive. Because that question like that, ChatGPT ripped the Band-Aid off. And so if I have that discussion prompt that's like, what is the mean? Why do we use median over mean? It's like, to deter from outliers and if there's skewed data, or why would we use mode? They don't have anywhere to go from there. So they can factually answer that question anyway, but then where do they go? So they can't discuss with each other. It's just a quiz question, and not a good quiz question either. So, okay, thank you. I didn't go over. First Hawks talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Slifka. This was wonderful. And thank you to our attendees who asked some wonderful questions, and Dr. Slifka for being more than willing to share more information, even post presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And at this time, everyone, we will conclude this session, and just to get ready for our next. And as a reminder, you can see the chat for session meeting room links, or of course, access the conference website for a complete list of our concurrent sessions and their descriptions. And while accessing the conference website, please don't forget to swing by the virtual exhibit hall to say hello to our Hawks team. And while you're there, you can view a quick 5-minute demonstration, request your t-shirt, and be entered to win a $50 hourly giveaway. And in the spirit of St. Patrick's Day, you will find a few golden coins throughout the conference website. So keep your eyes peeled for those. And if you see one, click, and that will enter you into an additional raffle. We'll see you at the next session, everybody.